Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for coming in tonight. Two things. I'll give a little rap about calling all poets at the end. Just two things. I'm going to be reading some character-based narrative things that I've been working on over the last couple of months tonight. And it was a little bit of a challenge because I just received word today that my latest manuscript called Moon Cussers was accepted by the same people who put out American Mental last year. So I was going to read a couple things from that, but I'm like, no, I really want to try these new ones. So let's go. And this one's called Frog Eyes. Frog Eyes Fitzgerald fought the foos, those high-flying flashpoints no one could catch. In a war we won, he'd boast, after 3 bourbons and a double rye at the fuselage on 4th and Dyer. The last great dive that isn't, he'd say, like so much of this freaking country, he'd add, as Faye invade Last Call and the dread, like the skies over Okinawa, April Fool's 45, set in. Following Foos was a breeze for Fitzgerald's bulging baby blues. This way, that, over, under, upside down. The best of the tactical 10th chased the sky, aflame with battle, black as the sea. Them quick as shit little motherfuckers duking and deaking so damn fast, you'd swear you never took a breath. Eyes bigger than mine, he'd assert. I know, Faye conveyed. I've seen them little fuckers too, and I wouldn't sleep with any of them. Like so much of this freaking country, she'd say, closing down the night. Emily and I just spent 2 weeks out in New Mexico, and I don't need to tell you folks how beautiful it is out there. And this poem came from that, and it's called Blue Candle. Here in the heart of Maricopa County, the girl who helped the thunder had nothing really to do with the rain. She was just a girl, pronoun, verb, standing in the shadow of the cross, who lit a blue candle amid the high mountains, who knew love's rhombus, proved proverb and vowel, a girl of the moon, of infinite clouds, who had nothing at all to do with the rain. Christmas lights kindle the morning civics at Molly's as Jack swears Jimmy was the best barkeep ever. And you nod, yeah, 'cause you're new in town and don't know yet the whole borough truth. But you swear on your mother's grave you know these guys from a deli on the corner in a dream about a deli on the corner in a dream, and you really need some downtime. But the devil and his deep state have other plans for you, boyo, in a room above a deli on the corner in a dream, in a room above a deli on the corner in a dream. I know we all write poems about writing poetry and things of that nature, and we have these little conversations with ourselves. So this one's called Scribble and Etch. Stay on topic. Don't scare like the last time you embarked on such a selfish mission as this. Thinking your thoughts so rarefied, you scribble and etch the scandalous slang we commissioned to carry these things to term, to a marginal comprehension which finds us more at odds than ever, more at war within. It seems like everybody in the world's kind of like written a poem about Billy Collins, so I might as well throw one of mine in. I had this thought that Billy Collins looked a lot like a turtle. So this is called Eastern Painted. The poet's turtle, in Eastern Painted, paddles like prose. The bard tidies his bonsai, pulls a thread from the blue cable knit and leans in. Sometimes it's more than a floater, he whittles, as Slowboy, as awash in fish flakes as the poet in wine, withdraws his head and considers that he and the guy biding time with the pen both bear the grimace of studied intent. She packs umbrellas in her shoes when she flies, he scribes, but it's tentative. It's not the place to hang his hat or set down his wine. This one's a slog, thinks Slowboy through a rabble of bubbles, snapping at a passing meal, like the guy in the sweater bites on verbs. The poet doodles. His double paddles northward to the sky through unkept glass. In a bit of a brood, the poet too, drawn to the same wild wonder. So you see, there's good days and bad days, and then you have your half shitty days, which I believe most of us will testify to having more often than not. Half shitty days really have no point of start or departure. Maybe you wake up feeling grand, but soon burn the toast or step in cat pee. Maybe your car hits a skunk just in front of your house. Perhaps you drop the soap in a shower and whack your head on a towel bar. Maybe the ride to work smooths things out, but the job sucks. Then what? 8 hours of suck? Sounds like a really good porno, but really, who's gonna last that long? All right, I understand. So lunch breaks the monotony and the jazz blows blue on NPR, but soon you drop a hammer on your foot or the fly in the ointment drowns in your coffee, and it's a shitty day again. And just like that, you're caught in the traffic home and no one uses their signals, so you almost rear end the guy in front of you. That anxiety wears off when, from out of nowhere, comes a kid in his daddy's Acura cutting you off, flipping the finger as he heads off to produce another illegitimate that you know will someday pick your pocket somewhere else in time. But up ahead is home and all is well. You hope. Who knows? Maybe your better half's had a whole bad day, and when compared to your half shitty one, well, who knows? Maybe they've had a good day, and that sunshine will make your half shitty day really a quarter of a shitty day. Who knows? Who knows when half shitty days become one or the other, good or bad? Who knows? Maybe that's the chore of living. This is actually kind of based on a true story, and it's called The Girl and Her Parachute. The girl and her parachute were a cute enigma from the moment she got in my car 6 miles awry of her landing. Thanks for the ride, she said, her parachute strangely mute. So unlike my mother-in-law going rogue in Vegas. But this isn't about any mother-in-law, past or present. This is about the girl and her parachute, who could have landed on my car if the westerlies blew through. You go for the buzz because all the rest is bullshit, she said. And in the sky above a wasting lake, 2 clouds are eloping. Cheering the ponies with God. With my face against the cloud and my ass against the burner, I'm cheering the ponies with God. Hold my calls, I say. God collects in the third. Always stick with the filly, he says, and of course he's right. What other choice is there for a guy still carrying his chapbooks with him, hoping for a sale? But I know better, and I let God talk. I love this ramshackle little town, he says with a genuine smile on his face, a small rain without end in his eyes. You guys are driving me batshit crazy, he tells the beer man. And you, he says, you're no better. Bogarting the chips and salsa, I hadn't noticed. So I moved on to the next topic. What about Monet's light, I asked, hoping he'd pick me a winner before the last race. It colors heaven, he says, like some stock answer he pulled from his hat, but he didn't have a hat. Just a carefree cloud that I guess he plucked from Saturn's tears. Sounds pretty, I say, trying not to sound too eager or envious. Trying to hold the divine tighter than I had just a few moments before when I didn't redress, rejoin, redeem. It is, he says, and Garcia stitches sunlight solos while Ella sings the blues. We're in the backstretch, God and I, coming to the understanding that we both tried our best. Hey, you know, you were human once, I say in self-defense. I know, he says, slipping me the winning ticket. Old Man Maneri's typing class. I learned a lot about rhythm in Old Man Maneri's typing class. They're only after your money, he'd bark. Now is the time for acceptance. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. He ranted like that from time to time, his mealy little eyes punch holed like a fossil, and click-clack went the clock again. Click-clack went the clock again. The sieged gets served cold soup, he cried, and that's when I knew there was more to him than rhythm here. There was an undertow of warning and instruct, construct and theory. A faith festooned with lies ain't faith, and he was goddamn freaking right. And click-clack went the clock again. And click-clack went the clock again. Eleanor's purse held many things. Everyone's prone to the shivers and yips, she says, curating her bag with a passion few possess. This one here is for the bloating, she puffed, holding a change of face and coin. One small vial, 2 orange pills, 3 sets of 60, 4 counts of felony, 5 minor headaches, 6 Christmas trees, 7 separate somethings, 8 triple ply, 9 bold remarks, 10 turtle doves, 11 assorted mints, 12 novellas, and you lose at least 90 minutes of life stuck in traffic each day, she'd insist. No stranger to truth, but not yet kin. God wheels without partiality, she'd note, handing you a hammer. I'm going to do 2 more character things, and this one's called Deuce Caviar. Leathery like Falstaff, Deuce Caviar led dual lives and hoodlum hours. Who can fathom the speed of men, he'd say, rendering a penance few did justice or ignored? We mismanaged history, he'd assuage, and you had to admit he had a point, whether or not you liked his purple socks with storms. Tort is nary its own conclusion, he'd occlude, appeasing sinners everywhere, but somehow still not disclosing how and why we pursue purpose and error with disdain. The good old days he dismissed without, oh man, the good old days is just a bad memory he dismissed without qualm. You can only go so far believing someone else had you covered before you're standing there naked for all to see. And I'm going to close with this one. Several years ago, I had started a rock and roll detective novel that I never finished, but here's the synopsis, and it's called Synopsis. Jack Maverick's murder mystery, The Blonde in Blue Shoes, is 300 pages of capering genius and punk rock, wherein our boy, fragged and tet, falls for his assistant's roll call of welcome uneasy behaviors. Jack's soft with a napalm smear along his flank. His point man, Sergeant Nick, keeps him off the juice. Kitty Mac's dead, his card in her cleavage. A bistro concedes murder in the manager's bed. The lead singer of Tokyo Sex Whale is individual one and should be. He's such an obnoxious twit. From here, the plot runs thin like a pile-up on the Mashaloo. So I add in a ganja cabbie to stretch the story and something happens. But I forget. It's been years since the editor slash. Jack didn't get through the bush blinded by love, or did he? It got complicated back home. The Mets have tanked and the Bronx is burning when Zoe, a would-be handler for a would-be star, opens her blouse. The skin around the napalm fringe begins to warm. He holds her like silk summer drapes. They'll never leave the hood, so they hold the line. Jack stumbles upon a band of dead roadies. After some jagged guitar solo on Jersey Shore, it comes to him. The corpses, the killers, the publisher's fate. So tune in tomorrow for when my next pod drops. Thank you.
And so I'm going to be all over the place tonight. And Poem starter, 301. A good start is what's important. Finish later. Poem starter, 257. I tell too much, but you miss the point, so I must tell too little. Next poem is called Altman Parts Pantoum. And Pantoum, of course, is a style of poetry thought of as French, but it's actually Malaysian in origin. And it's the form of the poem is usually written in quatrains with the second and fourth lines repeating as the first and third lines of the succeeding stanza, the variation being in the final stanza that the first and third lines of the first stanza become the fourth and second lines of the final stanza. And, take notes because there'll be a test. Parts of a Robert Altman movie. Footprints made in sand. Temporary evidence of touching other lives. I feel how warm it was. Footprints made in the sand by people we once knew. I feel how warm it was. Fresh surprise, sparkling eyes, private joke smiles. People we once knew, believed we were all that mattered. Plotting surprises, sparkling eyes, private joke smiles, merging dreamscapes. We were different. We were all that mattered. Discovering truths, disappointments. Our dreams merged differently then. We needed less, we had more. Discovering many truths, disappointed. Dissolving evidence of lives touching. We needed more, we had less, as parts of a Robert Altman movie. And this one is a foolish villanelle. And the villanelle, of course, is considered by many to be one of the most difficult forms of poetry to master. And I sure haven't mastered one, but it's a French rhyming verse form consisting of, 5 3-line stanzas and a final quatrain. And there's lots of different rules about the first and third lines and repeating and all that stuff. So a foolish villanelle. The art of love requires being foolish. Be mature, keep your word, do not lie, never cheat, be gentle, truthful, refrain from being brutish. Remember lonely nights, fantasy, deepest wish of someone kind, understanding, available to meet, yet quality suitors not in sight, thoughts turn brutish. Worth risking it all, though sometimes love is ghoulish. Jumping into it is not always a simple feat. It's true, you best be brave, but you must also be foolish. At times it takes work, can seem quite ghoulish. You can soar, believe, become Olympic athlete, but always be kind, be sanctuary, never brutish. You'll fail, get hurt, feel alone, humiliated, foolish, want to give up, succumb to ultimate defeat. Pray, asking how life can be so unfair, dark bluish. Heal, then pick yourself up, reject the idea of being prudish. Don't be too careful, hesitant, never admit defeat. For you know the art of love requires being foolish, truthful, trusting, gentle, strong, but never brutish. And next, I'm going to jump to a example of an anapestic tetrameter, because I think we all need to be reminded of the anapestic tetrameter, which some of you probably already know that it is the form that is most often equated with things like Clement Clark Morris, A Visit from St. Nick, and also Dr. Seuss often wrote in anapestic tetrameter, with each foot having unstressed syllables followed by stressed syllables. There's I'm trying to think, there's 4 anapestic metrical feet, and then sometimes it's referred to as a reverse dactyl. And so anyway, when you're submitting poems to various literary magazines and websites, sometimes they'll have writer guidelines, and those writer guidelines will give you a hint that what types of poems they're most interested in seeing. And there was one particular website in the writer's guidelines, and they specifically said, we do not want poems that rhyme. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I immediately decided to write this poem and send it to them. not a poem that rhymes. We do not want the poems that rhyme. We do not want them anytime. We are so sick of rhyming verse, poems of love, or even worse. If you send us rhyming poem, we'll return it to its home, into white envelope with much haste, or if no stamp, then in the waste. If you want to be in print, then kindly take our little hint. We do not want the poems that rhyme. We do not want them anytime. Oh, but surely you can see what rhyming poems mean to me, how their cadences rise and fall. Creating them keeps me tall. I love the poems that rhyme. I love them most all the time, and I work so hard to write them down. Your rejections make me frown. You think the poems with rhyming have quaint, annoying timing, scribbled by quaint old nerds clutching too tight their precious words. The rhyming poems may be old school, but not all come from older fool. The rules on rhyme poems that you make, I must violate, I must break. I'm not too old nor much too thin. I do not have pale pasty skin. I like Rexroth, Whitman, Sexton too, but no rhymes ever would make me blue. It's rhyming poems I want to see. Sing-song ditties created by me. They must dissolve your dirty look, get published in your brand new book. And I'm often asked what their reaction to it was, and I actually heard that I created quite an argument amongst the editors of the website, and they ultimately decided that they couldn't possibly publish the poem, but it's been published several times and it's in the book. Another type of form that I actually invented is called the buster, and it repeats words and builds on them, and then has a what do I call it? A type of a meter, but it kind of it weaves, it changes. So this one is called Explain My Poem. Explain poetry. Explain your poetry. I could have said no. Instead, well, I don't want to. I don't want to be too obscure. Connecting and communicating. Connecting and communicating are important to me. By way of explaining, I need to tell you I admire Buster Keaton. You admire Buster Keaton, she asked. Buster Keaton, the great stone-faced comedian? She knew who Buster was. Buster, the great comedian who did acrobatic stunts, wild acrobatic stunts, and experimented with what the camera could do. A stunt or gag, a fall, a cheap laugh wasn't enough for Buster. Wasn't enough for Buster. There had to be more. He intuitively knew what the audience expected and gave the audience what they expected, gave them what they expected with a twist of something more. Now, not all poems need something extra. Not all poems need an extra twist. But I'm not happy. I'm not happy with ordinary poems, even if they work. Ordinary poems seem too easy. They seem too easy. But of course I know good poems aren't ever so easy. And I know sometimes poems try too hard to be something they are not. Poetry is poetry for what it leaves out, said Marvin Bell. Sometimes too much is left in a poem to explain too much. Extra words unnecessary, just there. I think, she said, nodding her head. I think I know what you mean now. Good, I said. Very good, I said. Good, I said. Then please explain it to me. So tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I wrote a poem and dedicated it to a friend of mine whose name is Roy. Some of us know who I'm speaking of. He now lives in Eugene, and it's called Veteran Eyes. Most were drafted. When asked how many they killed, few answered. Most didn't really need to know. Their 19-year-old eyes were closed. There was heat, dust, insects, and metal firefly fragments, awful smells, screams, sobs, and their ears were ringing from how the silence was erased with sudden, deafening chaos. As triggers were pulled, they closed their eyes, as if they were ever open at all. They were trained to point and shoot. Team players, nearly every single one. Selfless preservation for their brothers in arms. He didn't close his eyes. 78 was the number, or thereabouts. Snipers kept their eyes open, worked with spotters, picked their targets, and confirmed their kills. Human drones. Later, his eyes almost closed because of alcohol. He imitated a normal life. Drugs let him pretend to sleep until his eyes opened to escape what he kept seeing. Hero, they say, with medals. Hero, they say, in ignorance and worse, out of guilt and shame for not doing more for them. Hero, they say, with political agendas, hungry for junk food headlines while wearing rose-colored glasses. Hero, they say, without listening to anything they don't want to know about. Heroes aren't supposed to get so depressed that more of them take their own lives than were ever killed in combat duty. Heroes shouldn't have to beg or sleep in parks or on sidewalks when paperwork, medical benefits get lost and phone calls go unanswered. The last thing heroes want is pity or insincerity. Anonymity is accepted, but they shouldn't be forgotten because they aren't the right rank or color for photo opportunities. Wars don't end when we are told they end. For some, wars don't end at all. His wife and children had seen enough. They were MIA for 2 decades. No one else was willing to keep their eyes open long enough to help. When he began to stay sober, he wrote about what he saw. 78 was the official number. There were more, though most don't give a hair. And he will never forget, as history repeats itself in the eyes of thousands more. Okay. Poem starter, 1936. Breaking news, breaking news. Again, the news is breaking, always breaking. They need to fix this. We, the border. Hope can be tasted at the border of the land of too much money. Just beyond is the magical land where money is wasted on designer collars and leashes for pampered cats and dogs. No, they don't really rip children away from their parents. No, of course they don't really put people in cages or let young women get beaten and raped. Those are just stories told to scare you, told to keep you in your place, to stop you from trying to make something of yourself, to keep you away from the border of dreams. Everyone knows only one nation on earth advertises its promise to help the poor, the tired. The border is not a straight line. The border is less than 10 items express checkout line. The border is a place to kneel and pray. The border is booby-trapped. The border is crowded. The border is for sale as advertised. The border does not stop the wind. The border does not stop the river. And aren't we all mostly water? We make the dust at the border. Some of our ancestral skin is in the dirt, the dust at the border. We are the border. You can taste hope at the border. Not a poem about the Roman Empire. We saw nightmarish things on the evening news: war, death, blood, people lighting themselves on fire. The Colosseum had arrived. Tonight, they cut away from a grainy video because it was somewhat disturbing. And I don't complain about this, but they advertise intense violence. Halloween kills a few minutes later without warning. The violence shown disturbing to a child and to squeamish adults. But who has time to regulate this when we don't even regulate the lies spinning from elected leaders, some of whom are willing to redraw districts in an attempt to cheat the democratic process? What does this have to do with the images or the Vietnam War once shown on the 6 o'clock news? Everything. The Roman Senate has arrived. Poem starter, affirmation. You made it. The past passed. And tomorrow's cooking. I smell bacon. Gonna be a good day. Inner voices. I read near his end, Leonard Cohen no longer heard the inner voice saying, "You're fucking up." Instead, he heard, "You have things to do. Get on with it." I'm aware of several things. My love for certain women no longer in love with me is like a dimmer switch on a dining room chandelier, very low in some cases, but still it could be easily turned up, made bright once again. This may not be healthy, I realize. I sometimes envy the ability of others to act as if their former lovers have perished and they quickly have gotten over their mourning and moved on completely. At least that's the perception I have and the impression they seem to give, so I'll accept it as mostly true. I have tried unsuccessfully to do that. I mostly look ahead and don't spend much time with rearview mirrors. When my negative voice insists I've screwed up, I breathe deep and begin the argument. Sometimes I hear a crow caw. Sometimes I see the hummingbird at the feeder. Sometimes I make the negative inner voice sound like Curly of the Three Stooges, and the absurdity of it all makes me chuckle. The voice retreats, failing to take hold, and I say, I've no time for that now. A smile is forced upon my face, remembering Norman Cousins. Laughter is the best medicine. Thanks, Norm. Thanks, Groucho. Thanks, Buster. Thanks, George the Father Carlin. It takes a village of people like Richard P. and Robin W. and many more to keep me laughing, but I convert it into energy because I've much to do. The love of travel. I've not seen Greece, Florence, Dublin, or the white cliffs of Dover, for I have not really traveled Europe. I have read about the 7 ancient wonders of the world, seen giant screen travel documentaries. My breath has been taken over seeing the Grand Canyon after climbing the road for miles, seeing nothing, and then at the crest, the magnificent expanse that no film, no photograph can adequately capture. I've had that breathless feeling when a new love has crossed my threshold. Love does change, of course, but for me, in some cases, it did not fade. But one cannot remain holding intense feelings if that love is not reciprocated. One must indeed learn the art of letting go, moving on. I could go to Europe, but I want someone special to share it with me. And if I find someone special, we won't necessarily have to go anywhere, but we might. Not a poem for sports fans. Don't hate me because I rarely watch sports and really don't root for any team. I'll pretend like it's an improv scene and have fun pretending that I want one team to win over the other team. And I will even whoop and holler as I fondly remember that once upon a time, I did follow sports, mostly baseball for a few pre-teenage years. But if you discover that I barely know who the stars of my hometown team are, or that I don't watch sports on TV or read the sports section of the newspaper, please don't hate me. You enjoy it. I'll ignore the idiotic rituals, the beer drinking, the shot and toke taking, the bets, the silly hats, the terrible towels, the ridiculous superstitions, the mascots, the way corporate teams extort money from local politicians and big city citizens to build new stadiums and keep their franchise teams happy. I'll also hope that if you are related to me, you'll never get into a bar fight, lose too much on a bet, or forget other things matter much more than the game. So please don't hate me for my ability to not care very much about the sports team playing in a traffic jam-inducing stadium near me. Poem starter 1019. Today, lay down in some grass and gently tap the sky. Not about the redwood. And so the magnificent bright white clouds forming shapes of disintegrating mountains and imagined giant snowmen, dragons, and cotton balls in magnificent contrast to the light blue of a northwest sky are smothered too soon by the darkening advance of bulging rain clouds. It happens quickly and with regularity, 6 months of the year, bright light to filtered half light to a cool gray that dims, and the refreshing breeze picks up as the temperature drops 5, then 10 or more degrees, and increasing gusts of chilling winds announce the coming rain. It speaks to poets of souring relations, the end of courtship, the burden of harder, harsher times, the end of carefree romance, of glowing youthful optimism, and the beginning of the burden of responsibility, necessitating strict discipline, thoughtful use of every moment of available time, and attention to minute details. It speaks of change as if to remind us everything changes. The more rebellious protest, clench their jaws, and pretend they know all they need to know to persevere through the storms until the clouds pass and the blue sky and sun reappear. This futile resistance to the acceptance of change creates anxiety, depression, until one has the epiphany that a valuable lesson is being taught. We should remain open enough to learn new things. Water flows downstream. We are mostly water. When paths are blocked, we still must flow. Pretending we do not have flow is not an option. Believing we defy gravity and can flow up to build momentum and crash through whatever is in our way never works out well for us. We can only stand moderate resistance. We can conquer, we can climb the highest mountains, but we must return. We are agile, we are flexible, but we are not redwood trees. The redwood tree can resist and defy for hundreds of years. They have strong earthbound spirits. They build an underground network that protects, feeds, and warns all who accept redwood. They aggressively push, stand tall, hold their place. Few of us stay in one place very long. We have learned how to destroy the redwoods that are in our way. Later, we learned they too were trying to teach. Destroying what is in our way is a temporary solution. Better to adapt, be flexible. Our enemy is not the redwood. Our enemy is within. And so is our salvation if we embrace the spiritual and allow ourselves forgiveness and grace. Those with faith believe they possess a little light on the dark path to redemption. Others insist if they do enough good work, it will balance the bad. This means change is a necessary part of the cycle, and our resistance to accepting this or doubting how important change is dooms us. Pretending to know everything that needs to be known while believing you have most of the answers you need only means you have learned how to live in the prison you have built for yourself. It seems secure, it is manageable, and is easy to get used to. Deny it as a prison because look, it has windows and locks on the door that you can control. You have the key. Realize, however, that stubborn resistance to change doesn't make you safer, merely foolish. You have retreated from learning and understanding to become less aware than a newborn child. I don't know what I don't know, but I know I must be open to learning and experience, even if it only makes me aware I know less. Some overcompensate and become addicted to change. Throw out everything. Everything must be new. Change doesn't need you to change things faster. Change happens. It is inevitable. Go have a conversation with the redwood about change. You'll likely find you don't speak redwood. Remember, we are mostly water. I know it seems scary, but use the fear to pay closer attention to everything and motivate your ability to change yourself when necessary. Faith is not stubborn. The redwood stands tall. Better to question with an intent to learn than to stop asking for better understanding. Ask your elder, the redwood. I'm going to finish with a couple more. Not a Van Morrison tribute poem. Poets should never listen to Van Morrison when they're trying to write poetry. They shouldn't listen to Van Morrison when they're trying to write poetry. Poets shouldn't fall in love when they're trying to write, lying and crying to write. They shouldn't fall in love when they're trying to write poetry. Poets shouldn't think too much when they're trying to write, struggling to write, forcing themselves to try and write, not Van Morrison, falling in love, thinking too much, trying, struggling to write poetry. They shouldn't. I like dead poets. I don't have to be nice to dead poets. If I'm bored with their poems, I can close the book and stop reading. They will never know. They do not ask me what I think of their poems. I don't have to give a drunk dead poet a ride home. They won't vomit in my car. They don't need cab fare. I have not been stuck with a dead poet's bill. I have not had to make excuses for a dead poet's behavior. A dead poet has never stolen a phrase or idea from me. I like dead poets. Someday, I will be a dead poet too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leopoldo. So here is my latest poem in the series I've been doing. Okay, this one is called Indecent Behavior. So here's how it goes. Indecent behavior. Madness shadows both behavior and perception. Was Polonius slain by Hamlet's madness? Was Hamlet simply convinced it was so? Was it a cover-up for an impulsive act? Fresh out of a mental illness ward, let loose upon an unsuspecting world, mind wandering helter-skelter, still coping with many a minor disaster. We met in front of a drugstore, went on a first date with bagels and coffee. Her name Cindy, her dog Josh. Josh and I became friends right away. For a while, the conversation weaved a bright, starry pattern. Then it slipped into a black hole. Could you give me sex education? I don't give sex education. I refused a guy that wanted hugging. I tried to make amends while chewing the foot in my mouth. Homeward riding, chagrin, burden, yet not quite phased. Even madness has not improved my opinion of myself. She might disregard the slip. No answer, and I moved on, following my behavioral pattern for the most part, its edges largely curbed by medication. So that's what it is.
Good. Okay. Unlike most of what I write, this is 100% autobiographical, but it had to be captured in words. It was too sweet. It's called Mama's Lesson. I can still recall it vividly, the small jar of ink beside my new fountain pen, which I had proudly and carefully filled with the side lever that sucked the dark liquid into its belly to dispense from its gizzard out to the flat brass bevel of the lip that I would guide to craft dark blue words as if by magic. In my haste, I neglected to screw the cap back on the ink. Forgot would be too generous a word, for I was all in a lather to make the words. I reached quickly for the paper, and the small jar scooted over, tipping on the beveled edge of the old oak table as if choosing itself which way to continue, then proceeding suicidally over the edge, falling and splattering its inky contents onto my parents' brand new polar white low-pile wall-to-wall carpet, which I now know to have been a luxurious gesture of relief to cover the dark hardwood that they had looked at over decades of depression and war, always with the fear of sinking into some unfathomable quicksand of debt and desperation. Onto that canvas splattered Parker's finest permanent ink in a Rorschach for a 9-year-old's exuberance. I shrieked and ran for my mother. In fear and shame, I begged for my unworthy forgiveness, and in my mind I could hear it What on earth what did you think? Why didn't you? But none of that came forth. I don't think she even gasped. She strode quickly to the refrigerator and returned with a bottle of milk. Milk. I watched slack-jawed as she poured and scrubbed and soaked up milk and ink with a scrub brush, rags, and a pan of water. She turned to me, "Get me another pan. Find me another dish towel. Here, empty this and fill it halfway with cold water from the tap." She poured and scrubbed and soaked up liquid again and again for what seemed like 45 minutes, until the stain had vanished. Then she vacuumed it dry. I was clapping and jumping. "It's gone." Like magic, the polar white was back. And I was begging, "Mama, I'm so sorry. I knew for sure I was going to get it big time. Maybe the clothes hanger to my bare bottom." But she turned to me and said, "Honey, I knew you didn't do it on purpose." But later I asked her why she didn't get angry, and she said simply, "There was no time. It was clear what I had to do and precious little time to do it." 67 years later, I recall that half hour clearly as day. Throughout the decades since, whenever the ink fell and spilled, as it always will, the lesson from that dear woman has sprung forth instantly, like the first 4 notes of Beethoven's Fifth. "Now is the time. Get on your knees. Forget who's to blame. Dive in and fix and fix and fix and scrub. And as I am on my knees, she is there with me. Do not stop, my dear, until it sparkles again. The bad times are gone. You can put it back together." Later, when she was in her 80s, I asked her where she learned that about the milk. And she said, "I don't know. Maybe it was just the elbow grease." But I knew better. She had forgotten. I saw the same determination in my brother, who positively relished a good problem, a good fight, a good pissing contest, as he'd like to say. I swear he would stir things up on purpose just for the challenge. He liked a fresh stain to fix. To this day, I hate white carpet. I like a wooden floor.
In person. So this first one is called Layers. The frayed woolen coat drapes over the framework of her broad shoulders, gathers in its surroundings along her morning walk. Tithings of a cherry red leaf off the burning bush, from the velvet-fronted grackle, one blue-black downy feather. Sycamores mottled in gray bark leaves its hollow trunk, greenish white and brown, interwoven in the weave. Rainwater permeates the folds. The old coat so easily tossed at day's end over the back of the frail wooden chair, its paint cracked from exposure and our sitting. Plies of existence in patterns of a life's design, its pleasures, its pains, warm yet shielding, harbor lingering scents of old ponderosa pine, sacred first sip of morning's coffee, sweet, salty sweat from the wearing. Worn thin, it is time to decide whether to discard or patch the holes where the tiniola moth larvae fed in the dark as we slept. Gather up its fine threads, stick the needle in, darn with arthritic hands, thin steel tip, small seesaw of push and pull. Fold fingers over cuffs, insert tired arms to the sleeves for one more sunrise in the coat from the chair so easily tossed last night upon our return home.
Thank you, Nicole.
If there's time, there's another one I wrote, but I can wait if we're gonna go back around.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was it, but I'll put you back in the spotlight. Yeah, I got you. Okay,
No, not necessary. It's just
you're
I didn't,
back.
I
You're
don't know
back.
how many of us there are.
I think we'll have time.
Okay. I haven't written in a while. pandemic, whatever, it is what it is. But I wrote today and it feels good. And I'm not sure that this is done, but this is its first incarnation. And it's called If My Body Was a Poem. If my body was a poem, it would be written by Rumi. His Sufic words would honor the love in my veins, follow the sinews of muscles with his pen, touching every memory they contain, of skipping rope and skipping rocks, of the stirring beneath sheets on those pre-waking mornings when you just knew it had snowed in the night. Wake up! There's a magical world awaiting you. If my body was a poem, the stanzas would dance on the page in Dervic whirls, spinning, spinning, spinning. Hands held gently, framing the ethereal isthmus often missed in modern times. Whispering notes of nothingness, cooing on each gyrating toe, push round and round and round. Wake up! If my body was a poem, Shams would know of the poet lover's devotion to him.
I would like to read one poem tonight, and I dedicate this to all the veterans. Veterans Day is tomorrow, but especially my Uncle Johnny. He was in Patton's Third Army, and when he was taken prisoner. When he came back from the war, he lived in a VA hospital his entire life. He never had a girlfriend, never had a job, never had anything. And so I dedicate this to my Uncle John and to all the folks out there who defended our country and continue to defend our country. For Uncle Johnny, this is called Tennis Racket. Today is June 6th, 2014, D-Day plus 70. The country I live in commemorates the linchpin of the 20th century with a fine parade, speeches, barbecue. 70 years ago, just before the largest military operation in history, someone said, everything is at stake. An old GI on a TV documentary recalls the blood red waters at Omaha Beach, mortars and machine gun fire, dead corpses floating, bobbing, limbs, torsos, smoke and fire. He crawls up the beach sometime after the first wave to the foot of the cliffs, to the stacks of gear, weapons, ammo, to the boots, clothes, helmets, and row after row after row of dead soldiers. A tear wells up in his eye, and he relates how he found a tennis racket of all things, lying there in perfect condition, and how peculiar it was to find a tennis racket amidst the chaos and terror on that beach. Leave it to an American, he half laughs and half cries. The TV special ends, and I go to bed thinking about the old soldier, what it must have been like, the explosions, blood in the sand, the smell of death in the air. And I wonder if years later, when he returned home from the war, if he ever picked up a tennis racket, just for fun, just to hit a few balls across the net. Thank you.
Okay, this is a short one. It's called Crow Feather. At sunset, standing on my little porch, I asked the 1,000 singers hidden in the fir trees to please leave me a feather. I had hope for goldfinch or the bright cobalt blue of a Steller's jay. And next morning on the path down towards the sea lay a gift as black as night, a calling card as if to say, sometimes we need our darkness to reach the bright and shiny things in life. Thank you.
This is one of my poems I've written just a little while ago. I know a lot of people go through this situation, so it's called Sunday. A gentleman, as another Sunday begins in a stale room, absent of perfume, staring out of a broken window as a sunny day glow. There by a dresser, that is where the Bible is stored. Quiet and shy, watching the sky go by with a sigh. all spruced up, all the nevertheless, for in his Sunday's best, black tie and tail, threads so detailed, grips his cane that holds his pain, heads out of the gloom of his apartment room as popcorn rent, where much time is spent. Here's a radio in a hallway echo, stepping down the stairs that creaks, the lighting so bleak, opens the outside door so antique, with irritating squeaks, heads down the street, slow steps in his feet to his Sunday restaurant where he's been going for so long. A table for two, that's what it has to do. That's looking down the avenue. Lays down his nickels and dimes, what he's done for some time, to order a dish of soup and fish for two. After a bellyful, he heads out the door, goes down the avenue to pick up a special flower, so colorful, from his favorite flower shop. They are so thoughtful, just for him on every Sunday. With his spirit will, he goes up the hill to God's green acres, way down on the avenue. Sits on a bench across from a headstone, sitting there alone, all alone. The name on the headstone calls to mind. The whispers so fine. Fingertips touch so much. Hugs forevermore. Snugs furthermore. Speechless nevertheless, for many words have already been spoken. Love is so hard when you give yourself away, but still being there, still being there. The smile keeps for a while. He lays the flower down, as many times before, beside the headstone, knowing he's not alone. A tear comes to his eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. This is about the first year or so I was in Seattle in the late 70s, and about some friends I knew back then. It's called The Green Chair and the Miller High Life Glass. I hope no one kamikaze strafes your apartment. It's so dreary, my girlfriend groused. She had wanted to go to Vito's for dinner, but we were both on SSI and mendicants of the food stamp culture in 1977, when I first lived in Seattle, so I was wary of expense. Later, we headed into the March wind on Madison Street toward downtown, and the ragged yellow banner of Birchfield twilight blowing above Elliott Bay. The photo on your Metro Pass makes you look like you just got off the swing shift at a concentration camp, she remarked as we waited at 2nd and Union for a bus to Tukwila. Perusing that picture years later, I would say it made my unshaven face, gaunt on Ellaville, appear like an apprentice to an anorexic werewolf. Back in my kitchen, I reached for the Miller High Life glass, but fumbled it and watched that vessel from Woolworths shatter at my feet. Then I went into the main room and listened to my portable GE radio while reclining in the green upholstered easy chair I bought the August before. A few weeks earlier, my girlfriend nodded off on her anti-seizure medicine and burned a hole in the armrest with her cigarette. The soft rock station was playing Barry Manilow's Trying to Get the Feeling Again, soothing me with his plaintive flute intro I had heard on the airplane headphones when I flew out here. After my girlfriend and I broke up, we swept aside the shards of our downbeat time together by telephone. Other friends from the day treatment program we were both in would visit then, and we'd talk about Pink Floyd and paranoia. Sometimes when I hear the Manilow song unexpectedly, I see her and other faces I knew when I first roamed these streets, under long gray clouds like apparitions above the 47th parallel.
Great to be here. Such a lovely array of talent and art. So I grew up in Los Angeles most of the time, and within walking distance of a bakery, and it had a wonderful slogan on it: fresh baked on the premises. And so I wanted to write a poem inspired by that, meaning it would be within 24 hours of the reading. So I did write it in the last 24 hours. And my poem is based on premises. It has a premise to it, just as the bread did. Thinking every poem has a premise, I suppose. So this one's called Fear. When man came onto the scene, I have news for you. The circle was already here. We were standing on a circle. Commerce extended as far as the fruit falling into the hand. Science lay in the cutting of furrows in the fields, in carving trees into wheels. No leader, no ruler emerged, not for millennia. And when he did, he brought God into our lives to show that kings too had a boss who was compelling each and all to tell us what to do, what to say, what to think, what to feel, what to kill, what to heal, and all that. Indeed, we did, just to survive. With no guarantee our monarch would keep us alive. All this due to the greatest manly invention of all, fear. When fear came onto the scene, everything changed. Each countenance peeking out of its shelter, the boatman silently stepping on shore, a child clinging to the skirt of her escaping mother. All else seemed to fall away except for fear, its invisibility, yet sheer solidity, erect like an unhurled spear at each of our sides.
The first one here is it's a bookstore poem, so I hope you like this one, Chris. It's called The Dance. It's our first date. We decide to meet at the bookstore. If I get there first, I'll tell you, I'll be in poetry. You say cookbooks. We never think of how we'll know who gets there first, and what to do if we find others in our chosen fonts, but it worked out fine. I went to cookbooks, you to poetry, and we missed each other that way, just not for long. We had a good laugh when we met at the bargain bin, privately wondering if that might be a metaphor for our future. But 3 kids and a mortgage later, it no longer matters. I buy you cookbooks for your birthday and Christmas, and just because. But you don't buy me poetry books anymore because you know how fussy I am. This is the dance we've learned together, and every once in a while, between house repairs and car payments, we buy each other bookcases.
Thank you, Michael. I just want you to know that Zoom, either Zoom or your microphone, did quite a bit of editing with your poem and left certain words out or elongated them into kind of frozen pattern. It still was effective from my perspective. Just giving you a heads up. When I record all this, and because it's always a big question mark, I get around to putting out the video, you'll be able to see for yourself. But I enjoyed the poem a lot. I think I got the gist, but I didn't get every word.
I'm sorry about that. Maybe it's my bandwidth on this end. I do have a second poem, and then I can end there.
Okay.
This is called Within. If I were to write like Mary Oliver, I'd be better off if I moved off the grid near marsh, muskrats, a stream or two, gentle hills, a woods that went on, farther than I could walk, snags, woodpecker holes, the trills of goldfinches that I'd come to know individually, worlds in my palm, fished up from a pond, the weather above, never a metaphor or internal struggle. I'd accept nature's invitations, learn to pay attention, feel the rhythm of the bees and bear grass, and the bears too. I'd learn the poem that writes itself in the wind before any pen presses paper. The poem I need to go without, find within. It's our first date and we decide to meet at the bookstore. If I get there first, I tell you, I'll be in poetry, and you say cookbooks. We never think of how we'll know who gets there first and what to do if we find others in our chosen haunts. But it worked out fine. I went to cookbooks and you to poetry, and we missed each other that way. Just not for long. We had a good laugh when we met at the bargain bin, privately wondering if that might be a metaphor for our future. But 3 kids and a mortgage later, it no longer matters. I buy you cookbooks for your birthday, Christmas, and just because. But you don't buy me poetry books anymore because you know how fussy I am. This is the dance we've learned together, and every once in a while, between house repairs and car payments, we buy each other bookcases.